went to the Air Force after I graduated from high school, and it was in Germany in the Air Force. In the bitter winter in January, a blizzard was raging. I had $5 in my pocket. I walked the 5 miles to Landsberg and bought a $5 German guitar. It had no name, but that's how I got my start. I was 21.
B.B. King and Johnny Cash. Their live albums I put at the very top of my all-time favorites, specifically because both Live at the Regal and At Folsom Prison. Those two albums are the perfect storm of a band ready to play, and more importantly, an audience ready to hear. And their subsequent live albums aren't bad either. Both Live at Cook County Jail and at San Quentin have amazing moments, no doubt, but it's the connectedness between the musicians and the crowd on those earlier recordings that make them my favorites. And interestingly enough, it was probably the success of At San Quentin that brought about the release of today's album. So let's get to it. Here are the 5 things for Get Rhythm by Johnny Cash. In 1954, at Home Equipment Company in Memphis, there worked a door-to-door appliance salesman. A newlywed, recently discharged airman was looking to make an honest living. As luck would have it, he shared a common interest in music with a couple of the mechanics he worked with, so they started jamming regularly and even writing some. And the three of them got some studio time at a local studio and recorded 4 tunes, a mix of country and gospel. Unfortunately, nothing they recorded appealed to the studio's owner, though he did like the voice of that door-to-door salesman, so rather than just reject them entirely, he told them, "Come back when you've sinned." Probably apocryphal, but I like the story. A few weeks later, they did come back, this time with a couple of rockabilly tunes they'd written. The studio owner, Sam Phillips, was completely on board with these new tunes, released them as a single on his label, Sun. And that's the story of Hey Porter and Cry 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 by Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two. Marshall Grant on bass and Luther Perkins on lead guitar.
Hey Porter, what time did you say?
Fast forward a few years and Sam Phillips is seeing a lot of Sun's artists move to other labels and bigger success. Elvis moved to RCA Records, Jerry Lee Lewis moved to Mercury, Carl Perkins was involved in a life-threatening car accident and then moved to Columbia, and Roy Orbison moved to Monument and completely revamped his sound. And Johnny Cash? Yeah, he left Sun for Columbia as well. But Sam Phillips still owned all those old recordings. So as all his old acts continued their successful careers, Sun would occasionally release compilation albums of old singles. Albums like A Date with Elvis, Golden Hits of Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison at the Rock House. Meanwhile, in 1969, things were going pretty darn great for Johnny Cash. He'd recently gotten clean and sober, started turning his life and his career around. The year before, he accomplished a goal he'd had since he first recorded Folsom Prison Blues in 1955. He made a live album from Folsom Prison. It went to number 1 on the country charts and number 14 on the pop album charts, was certified gold in just 4 months, won 2 Grammys, plus the single of Folsom Prison Blues charted as well, even after the so-called Johnson edit. See, after the assassination of Robert Kennedy, the song was edited to remove the "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die" line. Cash fought it, but Columbia released an edited version anyway. Rumor had it at the time that it was LBJ himself that asked for the change to be made, hence the Johnson edit. The following year, he followed up with At San Quentin, his first number 1 on the pop album charts, plus a single of A Boy Named Sue that got to number 2 on the Hot 100.
Some guy'd laugh tonight and bust his head. I'll tell you, life ain't easy for a boy named Sue.
At San Quentin also has his recording of the wreck of the old 97.
He was found in the wreck with his hand on the throttle, scalded to death by the steam.
Funny how these little threads keep showing up, connecting all my random albums together. Also in 1969, ABC aired the first season of The Johnny Cash Show.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
It was a variety music show which only ran for 2 seasons, but it ended up being pretty successful in syndication. To capitalize on the success of the 2 live albums, Sun released Get Rhythm as a single. It was the same recording that Johnny Cash had originally recorded in 1956, the B-side of I Walk the Line, but they added a bunch of crowd noise to make it sound like a live version.
When you get the blues, come on, get rhythm.
And believe it or not, that seemed to have worked. It went to number 23 in the country charts and number 60 on the pop charts. That's why Get Rhythm was on the Hot 100 in 1969. And one final bit of good news for Johnny Cash. He had proposed to June Carter, the Appalachian folk and country singer who had been performing with Mother Maybelle and the Carter sisters, the next generation of the Carter family, since 1939. Also a distant cousin to Jimmy Carter. June and Johnny were married on March 1st, 1968. And while they both had been married before, they remained married for the rest of their lives, and in fact died just a few months apart. Aw. And that's the 5 things for Get Rhythm by Johnny Cash. Time to listen to the album. Back soon with my first impressions.
I kept going back to prisons playing shows for the men, and every time I played one, I decided more and more that I had to go to a prison to make a record.
I think it's no secret that you've been in prison yourself.
Well, not for long.
That was down in Mexico, was it, or somewhere around there? You don't talk about that?
You didn't ask me about it.
Look, a lesson I think a lot of musicians need to learn. How you play is often more important than what you play. The majority of the songs on Get Rhythm are just 3 musicians. Johnny Cash singing and strumming an acoustic guitar, Luther Perkins on electric guitar, and Marshall Grant on bass. But here's the thing about why the 3 of them work so well together. First of all, Johnny Cash's acoustic guitar is usually far enough back in the mix that you can't really make out more than just a sonorous drone in the background. Marshall Grant plays upright slap bass, not the same as pop funk bass. So boom, 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 chicka boom, chicka boom, chicka boom. That's why they call it boom, chicka boom. And Luther Perkins plays structural parts throughout. Very rarely does he voice entire chords. Instead, he plays palm-muted single notes low on the instrument, providing melodic content which sits between the bass and the acoustic guitar. In fact, it's the same instrumentation and the same technique that Elvis, Scotty Moore, and Bill Black used on Elvis's early singles, like That's All Right, Mama.
Well, that's all right, Mama. That's all right for you.
In other words, in 1956, the only difference between rockabilly we hear as early rock and roll and rockabilly we hear as early country is who was doing the singing. First song is the title track, Get Rhythm, and right off the bat, Johnny Cash is playing with time. The song opens with the chorus, which is 8.5 bars long. 8 bars of 4/4 and 1 bar of 2/4. And for a song that sounds so simple, a song with only 3 chords, to have such a sneaky little rhythmic deviation in a song called Get Rhythm?
Get a rhythm when you get the blues.
That's insidious. I love stuff like that. Oh, and the funny snare sound you hear on Get Rhythm, it's not coming from drums. No drums on that one. It's not coming from the bass either. It's Johnny Cash's acoustic guitar. To get more percussion sound on those early recordings, he used to put a piece of notebook paper under his guitar strings right up by the bridge. Mean-Eyed Cat is a fun bit of business. It's the story of a guy that yells at his partner for spending too much money, so she catches a train and leaves. He ends up spending his last dollar going after her.
Then she paid $10 for a 10-cent hat and got some store-bought cat food for her mean-eyed cat.
An instant karma tale from the mid-50s. And is You Win Again the most covered of all of Hank Williams' songs? I mean, I can think of at least 4 versions right off the top of my head right now. Yep, there's the Ray Charles version.
I know that I
Rolling Stones.
should leave within.
Grateful Dead.
I just can't go.
This one by Johnny Cash.
You win again.
Oh yeah, and in case you're wondering, that's Jimmy Wilson on piano along with the trio. Country Boy is another early rockabilly side from 1955. More of the boom chicka boom sound that made him famous.
Well, you work all day while you want to play in the sun and the sand with a face that's tan, but at the end of the day when your work is done, you ain't got nothing but fun.
But Two Time and Woman, although it was recorded earlier in his career, it's a touch slower and it feels more like an early honky-tonk country kind of a thing.
I woke up this morning in a terrible mood. Now you talk about a woman treating a good man rude.
And the wild thing about dropping Oh Lonesome Me in the middle of this collection is how obvious and honestly out of place Morris Palmer's drums feel on this one. More than Jimmy Wilson's added piano, more even than the addition of the Gene Lowry singers adding backing vocals. They're just so forward in the mix. Honestly, it sounds like a piece for hi-hat and accompaniment.
Everybody's going out and having fun.
Without a doubt, the most fun I had on this first spin was hearing Luther Played the Boogie. I mean, honestly, it's just another rockabilly piece, but I can't imagine trying to get through it with a straight face.
When Luther played the boogie woogie, 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 Luther played the boogie and
Doing my time. I mean, it's a Jimmy Skinner tune from the early 40s, but it's so obviously his attempt at channeling Jimmy Rogers. The loose interpretations of time, especially when dealing with the chord changes, the subject matter, the melody, it all feels very much like Jimmy Rogers.
Lord, Lord, gotta do my time. I gotta do my time.
New Mexico. I mean, when I first heard it, I thought of Marty Robbins. Not that there's any Tejano in Johnny Cash's tune. It's pretty much just a standard cowboy ballad, but done in his mid-50s rockabilly sound. But it's the subject matter that overlaps with the kinds of things I think of when I think of Marty Robbins.
And how would you like to go and spend a pleasant summer out in New Mexico?
Belshazzar is one of Johnny Cash's earliest songs, but he didn't get recorded until 1957. It's an Old Testament parable about a Babylonian king and a disembodied hand. Like Elvis, Johnny Cash had a deep love of Southern gospel, something that would come out more later in his career. The piano and guitar are just slightly out of tune with each other in this one, which gives the whole tune a kind of subliminal tension.
For he was weighed in the balance and found wanting.
And the last tune is Sugar Time, which was recorded just a few months after the McGuire sisters released the original.
Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening, sugar at supper time.
Another one with the Gene Lowry singers. This is probably the softest track on the album. Not much of an edge on this one.
Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening, sugar at supper time.
Plus, thanks to the relentless marketing I was exposed to when I was younger, all I can think of now is...
When pizza's on a bagel, you can eat pizza anytime.
Overall, I mean, what's not to like about Johnny Cash's early rockabilly singles? Many of these I'd heard before, but some are new to me. I'm very okay with that. Anyway, those are my first impressions. I'll be back soon with final thoughts.
I would like to say, first of all, thanks to the people that have supported me to make this possible, to Luther Perkins especially. Thank you.
More than anything else, this week I've been hung up on Luther Perkins. In the early days of the solid body electric guitar, folks still hadn't figured out yet what kind of instrument works best for what kind of music. So country players in the 50s were trying all sorts of things. But Luther Perkins was one of the first, if not the very first, to hit on that magic combination of bridge pickup on a Telecaster, super clean, palm muted with a bit of echo. Well, technically he played an Esquire, but since the only difference between a Tele and an Esquire was 2 pickups instead of just 1, the point stands. And certainly James Burton, Waylon Jennings, Don Rich all did loads to popularize that particular sound. But I think these early Johnny Cash sides might be the first real sign of the shape of country guitar to come. Especially considering that in the 50s there was almost an East Coast, West Coast division between Gibson and Fender. So it was particularly unusual for a guitarist from Memphis to be rocking an Esquire. Beyond that, I kinda can't get over his playing style. The one word I can think to describe it best is architectural. His single note phrases played all through these tracks are more closely related to drum parts than melodic parts. Even his solos are like that. Predictable, rigid parts designed to keep everything locked down. No flights of fancy from Luther Perkins, more like rebar and concrete. It's not that Luther Perkins is a technically great player, not particularly innovative either aside from kind of tone choices. But at the same time, there was nobody else on the planet Earth who could have more perfectly filled the role of the third person in that trio. So I went back to the At Folsom Prison and At San Quentin albums to see how Luther Perkins' sound evolved. What I saw was, he's on the Folsom Prison album, but not the San Quentin one. Thought that was kind of odd, so I looked it up. And you guys, he died in a house fire in 1968. Yeah, so that kind of bummed me out a bit this week. I like the music on these early sides. I mean, as sloppy as some of them are, the attitude and the gravitas are immediately apparent. No question of Johnny Cash's intent when it comes to these tunes. He is immovable. Johnny Cash's comfort with writing tunes that aren't strictly 12 or 16 bar song forms, but instead have occasional 9 bar verses or bars of 2 to end phrases. It all reminds me of songwriters like Muddy Waters or Lightnin' Hopkins, what musicians will typically call 13.5 bar blues. In other words, rather than forcing his thoughts into smaller boxes, he just used bigger boxes. So what if they're shaped funny? I respect that. And look, overall, I'm not the biggest fan of country music in general. It's not something I ever seek out, and it's not something I've kept up with. See episode 100, where I talk about Little Big Town for more details there. But there are a handful of artists in the genre I genuinely respect, and Johnny Cash is pretty close to the top of that list. And although I doubt that this Get Rhythm collection is specifically one I will play much in the future, I certainly had a heck of a good time with it this week. So that just leaves my 5-word overview of Get Rhythm by Johnny Cash. Y'all, check out Luther Perkins. Now let's see what I'll be listening to next week. Rolling for year. 1988. Hey, that's the year I graduated high school. I should know anything on this particular Hot 100 very well, so now for week and month. Why does it always do this? Okay, December. So what is the week? Third week of December 1988. Nice. Christmas. I was 18. Number 55, and on the Billboard Hot 100 at number 55. For Christmas of my 18th year, we have Groovy Kind of Love by Phil Collins. Not just Phil Collins, but pop ballad movie soundtrack Phil Collins. Because Groovy Kind of Love appears on the soundtrack to Buster. So that's what I'll be listening to next. And watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, everyone. I'll see you next week.